Welcome to ARCAT's Detailed, the show where we uncover lessons learned to help you navigate your next project. I am Cherise Lakeside, Senior Spec Writer at RDH Building Science, and your host. My guests today are Ben Waechter, Principal Architect, and Alexis Coir, Project Manager, both from Waechter Architecture in Portland, Oregon. Ben, a native of Eugene, Oregon, is an award-winning and widely published architect whose principles lie in providing bold forms arrived at through exercises in concept, distillation, and intelligent programming. His experience includes a wide range of building types, including cultural, hospitality, commercial, multifamily, and single-family residential. Prior to forming Waechter Architecture in 2008, Ben worked with regional and international leaders in architecture, including Allied Works Architecture in both Portland and New York City, and Renzo Piano Building Workshop in Genoa, Italy. Italy, my favorite place. Alexis is an alumnus of the University of Michigan, where she earned a Bachelor's of Architecture with distinction, and Harvard University, where she graduated with a Master's of Architecture with distinction. Originally from Detroit, Michigan, Alexis spent her childhood growing up in the arts and architecture community of Cranbrook, where her father was the director of archives. The dichotomy of city to campus strongly shaped her relationship to architecture and the built environment. Before joining Waechter, she worked at multiple firms, including Ply Architecture in Ann Arbor, Michigan, Marble Fairbanks, A&I, and Frederick Tang Architecture in New York City. The project we're going to chat about today is the Mississippi Workshop in Portland, Oregon. Mississippi Workshop is a mixed-use mass timber building located on a prominent commercial avenue in Portland. And it's called, yep, you guessed it, Mississippi Avenue. Best street fair in the city on Mississippi Avenue, by the way, if you ever visit our city. The building is the home of Waechter Architecture and was designed, developed, and built by the firm. They saw the project as a proving ground for sustainable building systems and all-wood construction technologies, and as a forum for new creative conversations. Let's get into the details. Ben and Alexis, welcome to Detailed. How are you this sunny Friday afternoon?
Great. Thank you, Cherise. We're really excited to be here.
Yes, thank you so much. This is a great honor.
Well, it's a great honor for me. And when I saw this project, I was like, I have to have them. I have to. I'm going to do whatever it takes. So I really appreciate, I know how busy everybody is. And I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me today about this building. So I like to start with an icebreaker question, warm us up a little bit and get to know you. And it's different every time, but one of my favorites is, what professional piece of advice would you give your younger self that would have changed your journey through architecture if you would have had that piece of advice early in your career in architecture?
Well, it's a tricky one. I'm not sure. One thing that I've learned, I'm not sure it would have changed how my profession went, but one thing that I've come to really believe in is that architecture should and can be really simple. I think when I started out in the profession, it seemed very complicated, and the older I get, the more I believe and understand that architecture is really, it's about defining space. So I like to think about it as really a vessel to contain space. And then the second piece to that is material. So what is the vessel made of and how is it made? And in some ways, to me, that's really the essence of architecture and architectural design.
I love that answer because I think, especially, I've been around a while, so I have gone from one Radio Shack computer in our office to, we're 3D models and 3D printing and all these crazy things we're doing now. And it feels like we have almost overcomplicated things sometimes because we have tools, which is sometimes really great. Other times, maybe we really didn't need to redetail that thing 400 times before the project went out. how
Totally.
how about you, Alexis?
Yeah, I was thinking on this a lot. So I'm a bit earlier in my career than Ben is. I've been practicing about 13 years now. And I've come to the realization recently, especially while working at Waechter, where we're a smaller office, we're 12 people, and communication is so important. And everyone that works in the office is amazing and has so much to offer that I think it's made me realize I wish I would have gotten out of my kind of individually focused way of working when I was younger and really have been more collaborative. And I think that's hard coming out of a lot of school programs, high level programs, as many architects do. And there's this idea of the hero architect, and you feel this pressure that you need to understand everything and do everything, and you need to prove yourself. And I think what's been so great in the last like few years, especially with specifically this group of people, as not only understanding that you can depend and lean on others, but that there's a joy in collaboration. So I think that's something I wish I had come to earlier. And I do think the younger generation coming out of schools now, from what we've been seeing, we've taught classes at University of Oregon, there is that collaborative nature, which I think is just a fantastic thing for the profession moving forward.
Oh, we could have a whole episode on what you just said, but you're right. And with the way that our generational shift is happening, and I'm at the older end of Gen X, we can't afford not to be collaborative anymore.
Exactly.
Because we're asking our younger people to step up 10, 15 years sooner into roles we would have never let them step into historically. They can. It's not that they can't. It's just the way that things worked in our industry. So I love that. I love that answer. And by the way, my sister's name is also Alexis.
It's a great name.
Yeah, it is. Lovely name.
We have another Alexis at our firm.
Wow.
I know.
I think my sister, when we were younger, my sister was the only one. Yeah, nobody had that name at that time, but love the name. Just had to say that. Okay, so let's talk about. So, do you call it Mississippi Workshop? Is that the official name of the building? It was both. I saw both Mississippi and Mississippi Workshop in the description.
Yeah, Mississippi Workshop. And it's on, we call it Mississippi because it's on Mississippi Avenue in Portland. And we call it the workshop because we envision it as a workshop or an atelier, a place where we work, but it's also a place for meeting and making and designing and really fostering a collaborative environment.
And what a great location. I mean, the best street fair in the city of Portland is the Mississippi Street Fair. What a great location. It's craziness there.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a lot of cool things going on here, and which made it really difficult for me to decide what was I going to have the time to attack. So how about we start with the story behind this project? What was the mission here? What made this very unique building come to be?
Yeah. So I think there's two parts to that. One, we physically needed an office. We wanted to have our own office. And so that was the first part of it. The specifics about the building really came about through what is what we call our overarching project in our office, which is this idea of clarity, trying to have more experiential clarity within our work. And we wanted this building. Was our opportunity to really design a building and a place with as much experiential clarity as possible. And we've done we've achieved clarity in a lot of our projects in many ways, but we've never really been able to achieve a constructional clarity in at least in as pure a way as we had hoped or aspired to. And so we saw this as an opportunity to do that. And we looked at a bunch of different materials to begin with, but the idea is to, or the idea was to um, decide on a material that would be in some way primitive. So what's a simpler way of building that's um, what's a way of putting a wall assembly together that's not 20 different layers. And so we looked, we actually first look at concrete. So looking at exotic concrete formulas that could be structural, but also insulative and also the finish. Um, but when we got further along in the process and really got serious about it, we realized that concrete was not the right solution because of its carbon footprint. And so that's when we started thinking seriously about mass timber. And we really like mass timber for its um, environmental properties, but also we liked the fact that in theory we could make a building that was 100% one material, the mass timber. And so that was really the start to the project from a material perspective is how can we make a building that's really made up of only a few things.
Okay, so fair warning, I go down rabbit holes all the time. You'll say something and I'll go, wait, I need to know this. So you own this building then?
Yeah, we own the building. So we designed it, we developed it, and then we built it ourselves, or we
I,
acted as a general contractor.
I worked, while they didn't act as a general contractor, I worked at a firm that designed and built their own building here in Portland. And you got to love the creative process with architects designing their own space. Like I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall during your creative process. Just getting to a place where you agree that this is what we want, because this is a statement for you, correct?
It's a state. Maybe I think I like to think of it as is it's an evolution in our aspiration to, as I mentioned before, to get closer at this uh, quality that we call experiential clarity. And then so yeah, it was a stepping stone and an evolution.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, I think during construction, which I know we'll probably talk about it later, but a lot of things came up where we had to make like very quick decisions, change our expectations. I think the expectations for the building evolved in a really healthy way during construction, where we realized just because of the material properties and the fact that like no one had used mass timber quite this way, definitely in this region, we started to look at the building as more of something of a tool to learn from. And also, like Ben mentioned, to evolve our thinking. So in a way, we were really lucky to be the own clients because you never want to use a client in a kind of exploratory fashion, right? Like you have a duty to the client as an architect that's very serious, and we certainly had a duty to this building and ourselves in a way because we were our own clients. It was more of a process of learning from ourselves and from the building in a way that allows us to learn from it and then apply it to future projects, for whether they be like private clients, developers, etc. So the building is a fantastic tool for the office, and it turned out also beautifully, which is an added bonus.
I I love that. I really do, because you don't have the opportunity to approach it in the same way when you're working for an outside client. And I can't wait to hear the construction stories when we get to that question, because those are the questions I love the most. Before we start digging into specific details about specific materials and things you did, how about outlining for me just a general overall? I always say paint a verbal picture of this building and the spaces within it for me. So I mean, our guests will see pictures on our social media posts and those things as well, but just tell me a little bit about this building and what
Yeah.
it looks like and what it has inside.
Yeah, I think probably the easiest way to understand the building is, on one hand, it is made of a singular material, mass timber, and then on the other hand, from a um, composition point of view, it's a very simple floor plan and layout. It's essentially 6 rooms, 6 large rooms that are 30 feet wide by 50 feet long, more like a loft. And so it's a 3-story building, so there's 3 rooms along Mississippi Avenue, the commercial street, and then there are 3 rooms opposite that on the residential side. There's also an alley, so it's it's along the alley, and then between the 3 rooms on Mississippi and the 3 rooms on the alley is a courtyard, and the courtyard is essentially the arrival point or the living room of the building. There on Mississippi, there are no doors to the buildings. There's a single portal that you pass through to get to the courtyard, and so you arrive at the courtyard first, and then from the courtyard you enter the building. Currently, we have a coffee shop uh, on the ground floor, on the Mississippi side, and then opposite that we have what we call our workshop, and we do seminars and workshops in that space. The second floor, on both sides, um, is our office. So we have a meeting side on the Mississippi side, and then our desks and workspace is on the alley side. And then I guess I didn't mention it before, but the 6 rooms are connected with a hallway. So the building essentially it's a U-shaped form that creates this courtyard, so that the 6 rooms are connected by a hallway that has uh, the stair and the elevator along the hallway. And then on the third floor is my apartment, so I live here too. So it's the building is a lot of things. With that said, it's been designed so that the 6 rooms can actually be anything. So they've all been roughed in from a plumbing and uh, electrical perspective, um, to be any use really. So they've been outfitted so they can each of the 6 rooms could be an apartment, or each of the 6 rooms uh, could be an office space, or on the ground floor they could be retail. And the idea is to really future proof the building, um, so that it can evolve over time depending on future needs. And so, um, with that in mind, there was this idea of the building out of the singular material, the mass timber, which is in some ways inflexible, but from a composition point of view, from a floor plan point of view, to make it ultimately flexible. So to be able to to really harness the benefits, the sort of character benefits of the mass timber, um, with the flexibility of the floor plan.
Boy, talk about a short commute to work.
Yeah.
You could literally crawl out of bed and be at work in 2 minutes. That would not be a good thing for me. Um, so I have to say that my eyes lit up when I read that this project was designed, developed, and built by your firm, um, as a proving ground for sustainable building systems and all wood construction technologies. That is really unique, and kind of similar to the old kind of master builder model from back in the day. Talk to me a little bit about that. What was that like, and acting as a general contractor? I mean, we hear the jokes all the time that architects don't know how to build anything. We've all heard those jokes. um, Talk to me a little bit about that process.
Well, I guess to start with, it was terrifying.
I
um,
bet.
and but it was so we well, to start off with, we have tremendous respect for builders, and I think building our own project only reinforced that. um, so it was the benefit of it is that we didn't have to make all the decisions from day one, and so the for better or worse, the building evolved as we were constructing it and making choices along the way. And we learned a tremendous amount by doing it. And so that was so really the good thing that came out of the whole thing was just deepening our understanding and respect for really what goes into making a building, and then also reinforcing sort of our belief that simpler is better. So how can you what's the elegant solution? What's the simplest way to do it?
I like that term. What's the elegant solution?
Yeah, and
Uh,
as the acting project lead during construction, there was a lot more involvement, a lot closer involvement, obviously, because we didn't implement the standard submittal process in-house because there wasn't really the need for that formality like a typical um, project under construction. So I think there were pros and cons to it. It was a pro in as much as what Ben described, where we were able to pivot quite quickly and be flexible. But on the other hand, it did allow us to maybe push some decisions a little bit later than would be typically made. I have also the builders certainly a lot of respect for the consultants and the subs that were working on the project. Specifically, like we had a great lead electrician who was just so mindful because you really are demanding more of those subs, and none of them really understood, I don't think, the totality of a mass timber building and what we were asking for when they first signed on. I don't think it hit home that you couldn't just rely on a shaft wall to place conduit, for example. Everything not only had an architectural impact in terms of visibility, but had a structural impact. So you couldn't have the folks on site just making rough cuts everywhere. Like the level of coordination was extremely high. And for that, maybe there was a benefit to us self-acting, just because we didn't have that removed step of needing to go through another company acting as GC. Um, the process was much more communicated on site as opposed to a paper trail, which I think would have just been a mountain of administrative paperwork that probably would have drowned in.
I would imagine that after building your own building, neither one of you will ever design the same way again. Having that exposure. Is that a correct assumption?
Design the same way again?
Yeah,
I
after building it yourself and
Yeah,
kind of seeing probably more closely than most architects get to see what happens with with the lines you put down on those drawings.
yeah. I mean, definitely. I think it's just reinforced again this idea of simplicity and what's what's the obvious and logical way of putting something together, and what's the simplest way to put something together. So it definitely reinforced all of that.
Would you do
Yeah.
a building like this again?
Well, we definitely. So we really we wouldn't do it exactly like this, but we what we really like about this building is that it does get closer to this constructional clarity that we've been striving for. So it has that. Um, it also has a really strong um, character, because of the wood and because it's entirely out of wood, and because the structure is the finish. And in some ways, a big part of the insulative envelope. So we like mass timber. I think there are many things, the next all mass timber or all wood building that we do, there are things we'll do differently. Specifically, how we approach running mechanical systems would probably do that different. Um, we would there are some particular details about how we connect the mass timber to the foundation that we would do differently. The building really went up smoothly and efficiently. The mass timber part of it, it was every component was pre-manufactured in the factory, down to the sprinkler, to the holes in the glulam beams for the sprinklers, to all of the mechanical penetration. So everything was pre-cut, pre-tooled in the factory, and that all actually went together really smoothly. The challenge was connecting that kit of parts to the foundation, and so that part we've learned a lot and would do that differently. So there's some things that we would copy over, and there are some things we would do different.
I would be very afraid if you told me, if your answer was yes, I would do this again, and not saying yes, I would do it again, but I learned some things, because we learn from every project we work on. Did you have something you wanted to add to that, Alexis?
Not especially. The one thing that I got out of acting as being so close to the construction side is just to emphasize what Ben said about respect for builders and simplicity of details. And that goes alongside simplicity of details is over detailing. And I think that goes back to the earlier comment of like communication, collaboration. Is that I moved here from the east, from New York, about 5 years ago, and there's, at least in my experience, much more of a disconnect between architect and builder, at least where I practice on the East Coast. So there was this push to like detail everything because that's the conversation you're going to have here. And here in Portland, my experience has been more along the lines of kind of what you mentioned, the master builder, but this idea that like, it's okay. You don't know what you don't know. So you put down on paper what you do know. Obviously, you dot your I's and cross your T's, and there's like the legality of the documents. But there's also the ability to have a conversation with people on site. So let's not draw something just because it's a shot in the dark and we think we need to get something down. Let's draw what we know and then lean on the experience of people who are actually in the field doing this and respect what they have to say. And so I think that was a big part of it too, is like not overcomplicating our drawing sets either. Simplicity of detail, simplicity of drawing sets, and simplicity of communication all go into delivering a successful building. So that was another part of the learning process for me, especially coming from the East Coast where it's a little bit of a different scene.
That's interesting to hear. I can guarantee you that every contractor who listens to this episode is going to be worshiping the ground you walk on. Yes, yes, they're so amazing. You're saying all the things that we all hope will happen, that we'll have better conversations and respect, instead of maybe the architectural ego of old, which is changing drastically. Respect that everybody who brings something to the table is important, and their knowledge is important, and they bring different things to the table.
Completely.
It's the nature of our business. Yeah, I love that. So let's talk about this mass timber. Let's get technical a little bit. What really piqued my interest was when I read that for the Mississippi workshop, you use mass timber for all components of the building structure, pretty much, except for the raincoat. I'm calling it the raincoat in my head. And spatial definition, and all the surfaces within the building are exposed wood without the need for additional finishes or fireproofing, which triggered about 100 questions in my brain. So Go ahead and get technical, but give me more details on let's start with the enclosure and go from there on how you used all this wood. Because I'm kind of blown away about all of this right now.
Yeah, I can start, and then Alexis, you can chime in. So um, the walls are a 5-ply CLT, so it's approximately 6 inches thick, and that's the primary component for the wall. And that's what's seen from the inside. On the outside of that, the next layer is the WRB, or the weather barrier, and then we have 4 inches of rock wool for additional insulation, and then we have the weathering steel, and that's it. So really, just these three components to the wall assembly, and the floors, of course, are CLT. The glulam beams, it's a columnless structure, so the glulam beams span the short length of these 6 rooms that I was describing before, so 30 feet. The stair is was completely prefabricated in the factory, with the same species of wood, and then our elevator shaft is also CLT. So really everything is CLT except for this rain jacket that you described on the outside of the building, our windows, and then our roof.
And then as one like additive, we do have concrete topping slabs as the finished floor. And when this building has been published and there is the descriptor of all wood, there have been people who have been very quick to point out, but wait, you have concrete floors, point out that they are only finished, they're not structural at all. And within those concrete topping slabs, aside from obviously the slab on grade and the foundations, that's obviously concrete. But on the
Right.
second and third floors, they're finish topping slabs, not structural at all, and they have the hydronic mechanical system and all of the electrical um, within them. So that's the horizontal distribution of our services, but they are not structural. So the wood, yes, the building is all wood.
Yeah, and I just to add on to the floors are a really important component to this, and they're in some ways a complement to the body of the building. So the body of the building is the mass timber, along with all of the positive qualities of mass timber. The challenge with mass timber is that there's no cavity, so there's no um, places to run electrical, uh, plumbing, uh, as you would typically do in a framed construction. And so we really leaned heavily on this topping slab. So the topping slab is doing a tremendous amount of work. It's providing the heating and cooling. So the building, it's all electric, and we have air to water source heat pumps on the roof that are either heating water or cooling water. It's the summertime right now, so it's in the cooling mode, and it's sending cold water into the slab, cooling the space. The slab is also how we run conduit for electrical and data, and so all of the electrical and data are in floor boxes within the concrete slab. So the concrete slab is really relieving the body of the building from moving this stuff around. We also, through the use of the hydronic system, we don't have any ductwork in the spaces. So the spaces are really uh, purely about the material, the mass timber, spruce in our case, and then the spatial definition of the room.
I'm dying to come see this building. And I have some ideas of how I'm going to try to make that happen.
Please.
I live in Portland.
Yeah.
Obviously, we happen to be in the same city, so this is just incredible to me. Talk to me about sustainability. I mean, you've mentioned some things here or there. Um, Obviously, there's a lot going on in this building. Did you pursue Any, LEED certifications or anything like that, or was it just an effort to, we want a really healthy building, and what are some of the things you did to get there?
Yeah, yeah, we didn't pursue any certifications. Our approach was to choose materials. Um, One, well, the mass timber, sourcing it from a sustainably harvested forest, that was important to us. Uh, and then beyond the mass timber, to choose materials that would would age gracefully, so they didn't have to be replaced. And so along for the concrete floors, along with being sort of a good um, thermal mass for our hydronic system, it's also a floor that can take a lot of wear and last for a very long time. On the outside of the building, we used weathering steel so that the first day wasn't its best day. It'll just continue to
Right.
get better over time, and we don't have to worry about repainting it in 30 or 20 years. So we made choices like that. Um, we wanted a tight envelope, and um, the CLT, it was basically constructed as uh, a balloon frame, or I like to think of it as a tilt up, so almost like a concrete tilt up structure. So the wall panels they go 45 feet from foundation to the parapet as a single piece, and those single pieces are then joined through a half lap, um, one to another, and the half lap, as we've found, creates a really tight fit, so that there there there's very little air leakage through the wall assembly. We used um, Cascadia windows, which are a fiberglass windows, a high efficiency window, and then they're well sealed. So the envelope it's simple, but it's a very energy efficient envelope. Cherise, I think the other part uh, to this from a sustainability point of view is the hydronic system. So going all electric and choosing, it was more expensive, but choosing the most energy efficient heating and cooling system available right now. And so that's why we wanted to pursue um, a heat pump that could both heat the building and cool it hydronically.
I have to admit, that in all the interviews I've done now, we're in the 60s. That's the first time I've ever heard somebody describe a system like that for their heating and cooling in a building. And that's really unique. And are you seeing the benefits of that in your energy bills?
We don't have anything to compare it to,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's a very efficient system.
And I will actually, to add to that, I think the way we've designed the fenestration, so if you look at an elevation of the building, we have these kind of datums and a grid of windows that each of the windows is fairly large by themselves. They're about, I should know this off the top, 3'3" by 6'3", maybe 6'4". But we didn't do the kind of like storefront glazing that's consistent with a lot of contemporary development. Every floor has these kind of punched windows. The reason for that being, I mean, we do have in the office a way of kind of ordering the facade that speaks to like the clarity that Ben was mentioning earlier. This one would be a kind of gridded datum approach. Um, so part of it was, I think, the reality of, like Ben mentioned, these CLT panels that span from the foundation all the way up to the parapet. So you need a continuous vertical plane. And then in between those, they act essentially as columns. In between those is where we put our windows, and then between the floors where the windows are and between the columns with these spandrels that with a half lap connection tie those panels together, and the whole building acts as a rigid frame. So we have these punch windows that relate to this is going to get a little technical, but so we're on the alley on the back, as Ben mentioned. The alley is only 10 feet wide. There's residences, single family houses on the other side. So we have a fire separation distance. So we only could have a certain amount of openings on that back facade. So the back facade on the alley has the maximum openings, and we've carried that language all the way around the building. And in a way, it's really unusual for a mixed use building in Portland to have these punch windows that almost look like residential windows. The thing that's amazing is they're like every other one is operable, right? Because they're the scale, they're awning windows. And then because of the courtyard, and we have operable building or windows on really 5 faces of the building. So it's 3 faces of the courtyard and the east and west wing on the roads. We get great air movement through the structure. We don't have too much glazing, right? Because glazing is always where you get the most load from. The courtyard itself actually like works as a chimney. So in the summer, it's actually noticeably cooler than the surrounding streets. So there's also not just the systems and the materials, but the design of the building itself, and the way that the users can actually actively influence, air control and other things is uh, it's pretty amazing how good the building feels. I think, and a lot of it has to do with the fenestration and the courtyard, and also, of course, the slab cooling and heating, which gives you that like ambient heat temperature or heating and cooling that's so much more comfortable for humans than just like air constantly flowing over you. So this building has a lot of things going for it in terms of different realms of sustainability.
It sounds like this, and of course, it's not getting any cooler outside. So having those kinds of things going on in your building is even more important now than ever. Um, Quick question, rabbit hole again. Sorry, it just popped in my head. Are you guys occupying the entire building, or what? If you're not, what are your plans for the spaces you're not using?
Well, we occupy most of it, and the as I mentioned before, I live on the top floor, so um, I'm a tenant. And then we also have Capitola Coffee, which is the cafe who's a tenant on the ground floor. So it's really the three parties, and then we have what we call our workshop, which is opposite the courtyard, and we use that for workshops. But we've 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 offered it to um, organizations to use. There's been a number of music venues that have happened within the courtyard, and the workshop spaces is used to support those events. So it's really, we think of the courtyard and the workshop as we use it ourselves, but it's also this sort of a public amenity that we like to share with different organizations.
I love that. And I have to admit, anybody who knows me personally knows that I would run coffee in an IV at my desk every day if I could get away with it and not look like a weirdo. And I love that your one outside tenant, you not included, um, is a coffee shop. I'm like, I would totally live in a building that only had a coffee shop in the lobby. Um, what Talk to me about some of the design challenges. We'll get into construction in a minute, but my favorite questions are about the challenges. What was hard to figure out, and how did you figure out, and what did you learn from that? So let's start with design. What were some of the challenges as you were designing this building to get to your vision? with these kinds of materials? Because this is all, you're a little bit in uncharted territory here, at the level that you took this building. So what were some of the challenges you encountered during design?
I I think our biggest challenge was to build in flexibility
Yep, that's
with
exactly what I was going to say.
with a material that's by its nature inflexible. and and I think I spoke to this earlier, but really with this idea of the 6 rooms, trying to build in a genericness to the project, um, genericness in a good way. So the building itself, because it's built out of mass timber, has a strong character. But to make these spaces generic in a flexible way, um, that was really that was our goal and the challenge. And so from a technical perspective, how to outfit or how to rough in these 6 rooms so that they could really be a lot of things. They can't be everything in the future, but how can they be a lot of things in the future? So each of the rooms is outfitted or roughed in to have a kitchen and to have a bathroom. So each of the 6 rooms could be an apartment, or it could be an office space, or it could be anything in between. And the 6 rooms can be combined. It could be the building could be occupied by one tenant, or um, or the 6 rooms could be 6 separate tenants. So that sort of idea of building in flexibility, that was one big challenge.
Yeah, and to add to that, so like the process by which we did that, for example, was like doing potential layouts. Let's say we want what's an open office to be a residence. We have to lay out the rooms. You have to assume where the doors are going. Then you have to place all the outlets, because remember, they're in the floors, and there's like code to how many outlets you need, how far from doorways. So when you look at our office slab now, you'll see a lot of outlets that are like 2 boxes a foot apart, which is actually great because it's more area to plug into, but that's future proofing in case a wall goes down. Also, since the floors carry, the concrete slabs carry so many of our services, including hydronics, you can imagine you don't want people drilling down into the floor willy-nilly to place like base plates for stud walls. So we actually have these metal embeds um, within the concrete at a certain distance from each other, at um, like in certain layouts where hypothetically you would put walls. So you would basically screw your sill plate in where those embeds are located. And that's another way to future proof in a building where you do have to be, because the structure, everything that's a mass and physical in the building is carrying so much that you really have to anticipate where that flexibility needs to be, right? And that's a part of architecture in every building. Sure, people can, of course, erect a wall wherever they want to 100 years from now, but to build in that flexibility in a smart and practical way is probably like the best service we as architects could do, and speaks to sustainability, right? A building is going to be cherished by future users in the community if it's flexible and demonstrates a smart way of using it. If it can't deliver, then it's inefficient and it's not going to be valued, and it's probably going to get torn down, which is not the best result for anyone.
I really love that. And I mean, I've been in this business a long time, and I think that that's probably, between the interviews and just working in this industry, the first time I've ever heard an architect address. I mean, I know people talk about future proofing, but it's not something people talk about every day. And a lot of buildings are designed to be an office building or
Mm-hmm.
a supermarket or a hotel with zero flexibility, and things change in our world. And then they don't work. And especially happen, since I happen to know the area of our city that you're in, that's even more genius for this building. because that is such a dynamic area, and there's been so much growth there in recent years and changes. I love hanging out on Mississippi. My favorite affogato is at a little coffee shop down there.
Oh, yeah.
But I love that you really took the time and effort in the planning ahead of time and in the design to accommodate those things down the road. If you guys decide to move out and turn it all into apartments, you can do that with a lot more ease. That's really incredible. I've got so many things going through my head right now. Okay, this was something that popped into my head almost immediately when I read about this project. There's a lot of wood on this building. And, you talked about not having to do a bunch of extra fireproofing and things like that. I'm familiar with permitting through the city of Portland. What was the permitting process like for this building? Did you have to do anything out of the ordinary? I mean, there are a lot of unique things going on here, and they usually look a lot more closely at those kinds of things. So how did permitting go?
Ben, maybe you can start off because I, full caveat, joined the office after the early permitting phases already happened. So Ben, maybe I can talk definitely to the fireproofing aspect because that's an interesting story. But Ben, you probably be able to better speak about KPFF's involvement, the structural engineer's involvement with the city before.
Yeah, it's permitting. Permitting, permitting is always challenging. I think in our case, I mean, it is the first all mass timber building, and all mass timber meaning that the lateral system, it's utilizing CLT as a lateral system. And so it's the first one to be permitted through the city of Portland. So you would think it would be extra challenging, and maybe in some ways it was. I think to the city's credit, this the structural reviewers at BDS really stepped up, and I remember first project this has happened on for me at least, having special meetings with the city engineers and our engineers at KPFF, and they were really behind it. And so I think it was new, but to the city's credit, they really helped us get it through the system.
The city of Portland, as they may ask a lot of questions, and you might have to have special meetings, but it is a very open-minded and I think collaborative environment that they're willing to see new and different things. Where I know in some parts of the country, I hear this often from East Coast guests, cities are not real excited about going outside of the box, so to speak. But I do know that they will ask you to prove it first, which you would hope they would. So tell me, Alexis, about the fireproofing.
Right. So the building was permitted underneath the 2017 Oregon Structural Code. So this is before the IBC, and then Oregon adopted the Type 4 category for, which is for tall buildings, but there's other language in the code now that's specific to mass timber. We permitted as a Type 5B, but we still do need rated walls at the zero lot line conditions. We abut two other properties right on the property line. And for our egress stair and for the elevator shaft and mechanical shafts, just your typical vertical shaft conditions. And also, since we do have mixed use occupancy between the business and the residential. So per the code, as many architects know, you typically use sheetrock, and then where you have your joints, you are required to put like fire caulking. So like the first step, which was easy, is that CLT has a char layer, and there's a technical report that we put right in the permit set, and the structural engineer oversized the members that needed to be fire rated, and that was fine. The issue came with the joints and the caulking. So for various reasons to get the permit through, we did show caulking in our details. And this is a lesson learned, is that just the way the building was erected, there's no way that the construction team was going to be able to put all these lines of caulk between these 45-foot half-lap spandrels or anywhere else. So it just didn't go in. It was noticed during inspections. So, and the plans examiner, who was great and who I became like on first name basis with, was sympathetic, but he said, the code says we need caulk. I understand your argument, but we need to show something. So we engaged a fire engineer to write a judgment, and the judgment was that not only does CLT and wood structural members in general not need additional fire caulking, it actually could prove to be detrimental to their natural fire retardant qualities. And that was a big kind of like pivot moment. So the city accepted it. It's now in the system if anyone wants to reference that. But that was a big deal because the CLT, the building was basically up and we hadn't really caulked anything. And we did try to actually go back and like run some fire caulking. It just didn't stick to the wood. So in terms of code and the city and just the engineers that worked on the building, that was a potential pitfall that ended up being great. And now we can apply that engineering judgment towards future buildings and also to the industry in general, because you didn't see that kind of like depth of research into caulking and sealants in CLT buildings before.
So you guys actually set precedents for everybody else trying to do something like this and eased their way. That's beautiful problem solving. You're lucky. It could have, could have gone a different way. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's also a testament to our system and being collaborative and looking instead of just shutting something down. I've seen that plenty of times throughout my career where a building official will just shut something down and won't even hear other options or, alternate mindsets.
Everyone was very vested in getting this done and getting it done correctly, from the city down to most of our subs. I think everyone knew it was something special and it's something that needed a little bit more of attention, but was worth it.
What would you say the single most difficult thing was on this project, just in your opinion, design or construction, the one thing that gave you the most gray hair? Although Alexis clearly has no gray hair.
I have a little bit right there.
I pay a lot to
it's all from this project.
Yes. What would you say the one single most difficult thing was?
Well, for me, the construction was the hardest thing, and I think it was hard because we're not professional builders, and so so it was really a huge learning curve. Even though we're around building all the time, we're not builders, and so so schedule and also like we had good subcontractors, but this is sort of a one-off for them, and so we weren't necessarily, although I think, as Alexis mentioned, it was it was unique, and so many of our subcontractors really stepped up, and it was a special project for them, and they worked hard to get it done. I think we also had challenges. We had some subcontractors where they knew we're not a construction company that's going to be hiring them 20 more times this year. It was sort of a one-off, and so that presented some challenges. And um, I think all the other things that go into building a building, like thinking seriously about water protection during the winter, that was challenging. understanding how real that is. um, so construction was, for us, for me, the hardest part.
Hmm. Yeah, and
Alexis?
yeah, I think the biggest takeaway and for me was really the coordination that needs to happen in a building like this, especially for the project manager or the lead architect, and this partially put more pressure on the construction, but um, not coordinating as many of the systems completely that beforehand because of the nature of the project, because of honestly like the way permitting works in Portland, that not you can defer many things. That's a big difference from the East Coast.
Yes.
So it works great in some ways, but that was very challenging with the mass timber. And luckily, everything made it in, but not only coordinating with the subs and the trades ahead of time, but coordinating with the person who's going to be erecting your CLT. Um, we didn't start coordination with a lot of those additional players until like CA kickoff more, or when we were truly like sourcing the wood and trying to find the main CLT erector. And changes occurred that then had to be tracked back through permitting, which for me was one of the biggest challenges, just like tracking all those permit changes and making sure it happened in a timely fashion for the rolling inspections. So I think definitely like one big takeaway for us is just shifting coordination earlier in a project phase instead of during CDs or, as you're getting into CA, kind of even starting to think about that in the schematic phase, or definitely the design development phase, and getting ahead of those issues.
That's great advice, because we do get away with deferring a lot in Portland, and I have seen that get people in trouble. And so that's really great advice, especially when you have such an inflexible building that you're trying to make flexible. Making those decisions early probably would be a big game changer. I've been waiting so long for this question. Let's talk about construction. I'm really excited to hear about the surprises and challenges that arose during construction that caused you to navigate in a different direction, or pivot, or make a completely different decision. Um, Talk to me about the problem solving, and just a couple of notable things that happened during construction and how you solved it.
Well, where to begin? I guess you begin at the foundation.
We probably could have done a whole episode on construction.
I think so. The mass timber, because it came as a prefabricated kit of parts, the the mass timber went together really smoothly, more smoothly than I thought it would. In fact, I think the real challenge was connecting this huge kit of parts to the foundation. That was, if I was to isolate one thing, that was probably the hardest part. And one thing that we would do differently next time is we have hold downs. So we have steel hold downs that connect the mass timber to the foundation. And we had a separate subcontractor installing the steel hold downs from the contractor who was putting in the mass timber. And I think if we were to do it next time, we would have the CLT installer also install the hold downs, which they are certainly capable of doing. Um, and just because they're so like integrally connected, and if the hold down is not placed correctly, it messes up all of the CLT installation. And so that was sort of a big learning lesson. Um, I think how these hold downs are designed, we would probably do differently next time. Um, they turned out, I mean, they look great, but I think there would be easier ways uh, to install the hold down to the concrete, and similarly easier ways for the CLT to connect to the hold down.
Alexis?
I mean,
Just pick a
there's
couple of your favorites.
a couple of my favorites. I think when Ben mentioned the seasonal changes that happen in Portland and construction and tenting. So typically, you see tenting happen, not just on all wood buildings, but you certainly have seen on other CLT hybrid buildings in the city. And I think Ben's talked to this before. We were perhaps overly optimistic about construction timeline, but also about the false promise of a dry Portland winter, and it turned out being like one of the wettest. And we had issues with like breaching of like an initial roof membrane, et cetera. So the wood was completely exposed to changes of temperature and moisture and full on snow and water. Luckily, there were no detrimental impacts to the wood. It gets wet, it dries out, life continues. Um, we were maybe lucky in that sense, or that's just like the natural proclivity of the material. But there were setbacks definitely because we didn't anticipate like the impact of weather. And I think that goes to Ben's comment about we interact with builders a lot, but we are not builders. And the
Right.
biggest challenge was probably just like scheduling things, scheduling subcontractors. And I, in the office, wasn't responsible for that, but I was very closely seeing that process. And I think that would be another thing that would change, aside from just like general details and other things, was just like scheduling and communicating to sub-consultants when they would be needed. I do think that that was a kind of like push and pull area of the project that probably a professional builder would understand to look out for, that caught us a little bit flat-footed at times.
I'm aware of. I won't speak in any details here, but a wood frame project, similar situation, left out in the weather, and had a lot of problems. A lot of problems, huge delays, like
Hmm.
beyond a year. Had to, the building was no longer square. Um, Again, down a rabbit hole. Did you guys do anything special? I haven't worked on projects like this. So, did you do anything special for waterproofing with all that wood beyond the normal things we would do?
No. Well, Ben, maybe you can add, but the only thing I would note that might be of interest to the audience is we use the self-adhered membrane called frog skin, and it's specifically for mass timber. So it's a breathable membrane. So mentioning about the wood getting wet and then drying out, we have had instances of a water penetration after, like post occupancy, like within the past year. And it's amazing because you can see immediately like when the roof leaks. So it's not like a surprise down the road.
Right.
But what's amazing is that the wood just dries out, and it can dry from both sides. It can dry to the inside. It can also dry through this frog skin to the outside. Ben, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but that was the biggest takeaway in terms of like specifications for me.
Yeah, and well, during construction, so what Alexis mentioned about just protect. So we went into the project overly optimistic about schedule and weather, and so we didn't budget for any temporary weather protection, and um, we ended up adding that. So we ended up building a temporary roof over each section of the building. We reused it, so we built we built a temporary roof over the Mississippi side, and then once the Mississippi side had its permanent roof installed, we with the crane we lifted the temporary roof over to the east side, um, and installed the roof underneath the temporary roof there. So I think investing in or understanding the importance of investing in temporary weather protection it's a real thing and something that if we were to do it again, we'd take more seriously.
We learned our lessons several times.
I have to ask this. So, Ben, are you from the West Coast?
I'm from Oregon. I am. Yep.
You are just a really optimistic person then.
Yeah, it was well, it's not fun to spend money on stuff that doesn't go directly into the building. But
Yeah.
with the tenting, um, now I know how valuable a tent can be.
Lesson learned, people,
Yeah.
listeners.
Yep,
If you
it's
live
always
in
going to rain.
somewhere where it rains all the time, you might want those tents or temporary roofs. I like to close out every episode with a couple of closing questions that are less project specific and more industry specific. I kept it short for you guys today because I knew that we would have a lot to talk about on this building. So, your firm designed, developed, and built this building, which is fairly unique. It's really unique for an architecture firm. I'm curious as to your opinion on whether you envision seeing more of this master builder, design build kind of concept for whole entire buildings in the future. Do you think we're moving that way?
I'm not sure if we are or aren't. I think we're definitely moving in a more towards a more collaborative environment. I would say on um, all of our projects have robust pre-construction arrangements, between ourselves and the builders and the owners. And I think when I started out, that wasn't always the case. And in fact, that might have been a rarity. It used to be, um, design, bid, build, and and so I I do think for us at least, we like to be experts at designing and being the best architects that we can. So I think for us, we're not we don't envision getting into the construction business. Um, we have an enormous respect for builders and an enormous appreciation for collaboration and starting that collaboration as early as possible in a project, in the design of a project, to bring in all of everybody's unique perspectives and insights into to putting a building together. Um, so so I see that as a really positive thing for the industry. This sort of collaborative nature that seems to be becoming more and more popular.
And that is truly something I'm hearing about a lot. Um, just I'm hearing more and more and more about, whole teams coming on way earlier. It may cost, and that's the thing is I hear a lot of people say, we can't afford to do that. You save so much down the road. You can't afford not to,
Yeah.
is my response to that question. It's short-term thinking to think that I can't afford to bring these people on early if you're not looking to where you're going to lose the most money, which is when? During construction.
Hmm.
Because that's when every little thing that you didn't coordinate or didn't collaborate on is going to rear its ugly head. How about you, Alexis? What do you think our future looks like in this arena?
I have no idea how to answer that question at all. I will say I agree with Ben's statement. Personally, I think that the role of an architect has always expanded, contracted, and I think there's a look to expanding it as to place ourselves maybe more centrally into certain conversations and certain kinds of work. I'm more of a traditional architect. I think we do what we do well, and part of that is collaboration and coordination. And I don't necessarily see the added benefit of us also becoming builders and developers. I think some firms do it quite well, but I would question whether or not that's an appropriate shift for the profession at large.
So, final question, and everybody on the planet who's ever been on this podcast gets this question. As individuals, we all hope to live a life and do things that make some kind of impact, either personal or professional, some kind of contribution to make our world a better place. Personally, it's a big joke. I even have a hashtag. Personally, I call this my world domination statement. What I personally want to do to make the world better. So, for each of you, personal or professional, how would you as an individual hope to make a difference in our world?
I can start with that because I've been thinking a lot about it. And I think it goes to your very first question about what would you tell your past self? And when I was younger, I had great aspirations about, saving cities through architecture and like this kind of, like hero, complex, but idea of like the hero. And I think as I definitely get older and in more managerial roles, I think I started to look at it at a much finer scale. The difference I can make is with the people I work with every day. So whether or not that be Ben or the designers or builders or clients, is just take care with each interaction and each individual, and kind of like just working at a smaller scale. And I think that kind of ripples out and could have more of an impact than I think we realize.
I love that. I always talk about that ripple effect. We will never know how much impact we have every time we take an extra minute to help somebody or collaborate on something. You're never going to hear about it, but it does ripple out. And someday, 10 years from now, somebody you worked with is going to say something to you, and you're going to go, wow, I don't even remember ever saying that or doing that made a difference in their life. How about you, Ben?
Well, I guess I would answer that relative to our studio, and one thing that really motivates me in the work that we do is that it's not novelty based. It's really refinement based. And so I mentioned earlier on we have um, this overarching project. So we have all of our regular projects, but we have this sort of office wide ongoing, it'll never end project that we sometimes call our clarity project. But it's essentially this idea of um, how to design and build places that have experiential clarity. And so as an office, it's this sort of shared it's a shared goal of getting better at doing that, and really understanding techniques and ways of getting closer to it. And so I really feel like, I mean, for me that's a big motivator, that it's a thing that's outside of all of us, but we're working together on it, and it's something that's evolving and really getting better, every year. Um, and so that's a very satisfying thing for me.
Well, I have a feeling a lot of people are going to be thinking about that exact same thing after hearing this episode. Ben and Alexis, thank you so much for joining me today and talking to me about the Mississippi Workshop. I will be there soon. I'll tell you why after we log off. But thank you. I really appreciate your time today, and it was just fantastic hearing about this building.
Thank you. It's been great.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cherise.